You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got some surprising bad news for Trump here. We have all watched as he's used his U.S. attorneys and his prosecutors to seek political vengeance for himself. He now seems to have butted up against a major obstacle on that front against one of his biggest political opponents. Can you explain the update out of Virginia?
Yeah, Brian, Trump is not having much luck prosecuting his political enemies. He talks a big game on social media and elsewhere about who he wants to prosecute. But, he had a heck of a time getting James Comey indicted. And that's an indictment that, may not be long for this world. It may be dismissed. But now we've got New York Attorney General Letitia James, somebody who Trump has said must be prosecuted and it must be done now. This was in a recent social media post. Well, we just had news break that the lead prosecutor who has been investigating allegations of potential mortgage fraud by Letitia James has shared in confidence with multiple fellow prosecutors that she doesn't believe there's even probable cause to indict Letitia James, never mind proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which, when we are investigating cases in the grand jury and we are making decisions as to whether to indict or not, the bare minimum we need is probable cause. However, the Department of Justice rules say that we must also believe we have evidence that can satisfy the standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt if we're even going to seek the indictment in the first instance. Well, this prosecutor, her name is Elizabeth UC. She's been with the Department of Justice for more than 18 years. Seems like she's somebody not only with a lot of experience, but who is highly regarded in the Eastern District of Virginia U.S. Attorney's Office, though she's in a satellite office down in Norfolk, Virginia. The main U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District is in Alexandria, Virginia, right across the river from D.C., and that's where Lindsay Halligan, the newly installed Donald Trump flunky U.S. attorney, went into the grand jury and indicted James Comey when no other career prosecutor would. Well, now it seems like that problem is replicating itself in another satellite office of that very same United States Attorney's Office. And it looks like Donald Trump and his U.S. attorney in that office will have a very hard time securing an indictment against Donald Trump's avowed enemy, Letitia James.
Well, of course, the obvious question here is we have seen lots of instances where rank and file prosecutors, line prosecutors, aren't willing to sign their names on any of these vindictive or selective prosecutions at the hands of Trump. And so what's going to stop someone like Lindsay Halligan from just saying, you know what, I'll just do it myself. After all, that's why I'm here.
Nothing will stop Lindsay Halligan from walking into a grand jury without enough evidence, without the rule of law at her back, and without any loyalty to the Constitution, walking into yet another grand jury and seeking an indictment of a Donald Trump enemy. The next question becomes, will the grand jury go for it? Let's remember that to get an indictment of James Comey, former FBI director, who Donald Trump had been vowing to prosecute for a very long time, Donald Trump's own U.S. attorney that he appointed, a gentleman named Eric Siebert, a longtime federal prosecutor in the Alexandria U.S. Attorney's Office, said, I will not seek an indictment of James Comey because we don't have the evidence to support it. So Donald Trump had to fire him, remove him. Actually, it looks like he may have resigned. Donald Trump claimed he fired him. Either way, Eric Siebert is gone. Donald Trump had to install one of his flunkies, Lindsay Halligan, a former insurance lawyer and beauty pageant contestant, as most of the most accomplished U.S. attorneys are, sent her into the grand jury, and it seems like with insufficient evidence, she somehow, twisted the arm of enough grand jurors to get them to vote out an indictment. But, Brian, that indictment is about to be put to the test in court when James Comey makes his very first court appearance on October 9th, and I will predict that things are not going to go well for Donald Trump, Lindsay Halligan, and the Department of Justice. But to answer your question, I guess Lindsay Halligan could jump in a car, drive from Alexandria a few hours down to Norfolk, Virginia, go into the grand jury, and do some more arm twisting of the grand jurors, trying to get a baseless, vindictive indictment pushed through against Letitia James.
And by the way, just a quick aside, as we continue to cover this, if those who are watching want to continue to support our work, the best way to do that is to subscribe to our channels. I'm going to put both of those links in the post description of this video. It's completely free, but a great way to support our work. You know, we are witnessing more and more of these rank and file or line prosecutors refusing to put their own careers, their own law licenses on the line, because again, remember that engaging in selective prosecution is not abiding by your oath of office. And so these people then shoulder some legal exposure by virtue of doing this on behalf of Donald Trump. Their own law licenses will be put on the line. And this is not a new phenomenon for anybody who works in Trump's orbit. We've seen Rudy Giuliani, Kenneth Chesebro, Jenna Ellis, all of these lawyers and other attorneys get disbarred. So what happens in these instances where the only people who are willing to do Trump's bidding are the U.S. attorneys and political appointees who are there for that express reason? Are they just going to keep hollowing out the ranks of these rank-and-file prosecutors until they just have nobody left? Or the people that they do have left are people who are so devoid of any integrity that they're just willing to blindly do Trump's bidding, even if it puts their own livelihood, their own law licenses on the line?
You know, it sure looks that way, but I don't think they're going to find enough prosecutors or attorneys who want to be prosecutors who just have no regard for their law license, for the rules of ethics, you know, by which we are all bound, no regard for the rule of law or the Constitution. I don't think they're going to find enough compromised lawyers to backfill for all of the honest, ethical lawyers who are DOJ lawyers because they really want to do the work of the American people, not the work of an aspiring dictator in the Oval Office. So they're probably going to be left with Trump flunkies to be running into grand juries, perhaps nationwide, seeking baseless, evidence-free, vindictive, and selective indictments and prosecutions. But, you know, the thing is, these things will not make it through the courts. Federal judges have shown time and again that they are remaining loyal to the rule of law and the Constitution. They're standing strong in other contexts, civil suits. They are issuing temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions against Donald Trump's lawlessness and unconstitutional acts. So, you know, this will all be for naught at the end of the day with respect to any cases that are vindictively pursued. But as we all know, it's going to inflict a lot of damage, a lot of heartache, a lot of sleepless nights for, you know, the James Comeys and the Letitia James of this like dark episode in our nation's history. Donald Trump weaponizing the rule of law to vindictively use it against his enemies. But, you know, I do think there's going to be a point of diminishing returns. You can only do this but so many times before I think it all begins to fall apart. And even the lapdogs and the flunkies and the sycophant lawyers at DOJ like Pam Bondi and Lindsay Halligan and Todd Blanche are not going to be all that excited about repeatedly going into grand juries and pursuing baseless, vindictive indictments, knowing that when they do it, you know, they are very likely looking at having their law license revoked, being disbarred in the future. As you mentioned, Rudy Giuliani, Kenneth Chesebro, Jeffrey Clark, John Eastman are all disbarred or pending disbarment, and other lawyers have been sanctioned and suspended from the practice of law. Anybody who chooses to plug in to a prosecution of James Comey, Letitia James, or other, you know, Donald Trump enemies, they're going to become, you know, a member of that ignoble club, Rudy and company.
Glenn, in very much the same way that James Comey is building up his case against the Trump administration right now, and they can point to the fact that Eric Siebert, the Trump-appointed previous U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, would not indict him just because Donald Trump sent out the clarion call, and so Trump had to install a new U.S. attorney who was willing to do his bidding, and how that's going to be evidence in favor of James Comey that what Trump is engaged in is a vindictive prosecution. Can New York Attorney General Letitia James point to the fact that Elizabeth Yusey right here, who oversees criminal prosecutions in the Eastern District of Virginia, she came forward and refused, that we know this has been publicly reported now, she's come forward and refused to indict Letitia James. And so that will just serve as more evidence in her effort to absolve herself of culpability if and when Trump finally does land on some U.S. attorney who's willing to do his bidding. Like, are all of the steps that we're seeing right now just basically building up the defenses of all of these people who are in the dragnet of Donald Trump's vindictive prosecutions?
Absolutely. This will all be admissible evidence at a motion to dismiss the James Comey indictment, and if Letitia James is indicted, the inevitable motion to dismiss her indictment for vindictive prosecution. Elizabeth Yusi's decision, as it's being reported, to decline to indict because there's insufficient evidence even of probable cause, that will be marquee evidence that will assist Letitia James in her quest to get the indictment dismissed for vindictive and/or selective prosecution. And interestingly, the Comey evidence might also be admissible in the Letitia James motion to dismiss and vice versa, because there's what we call 404B evidence, a pattern of conduct by Donald Trump and his dirty flunky, Lindsay Halligan, going into multiple grand juries and seeking baseless vindictive indictments. So all of this, now, I do not believe for a minute, Brian, that Elizabeth Yusi is doing this because she wants to help build a defense in to Letitia James. It sounds like she is remaining loyal to her oath to follow the facts and the law without fear or favor, and indict if the evidence supports it, but to decline to indict if the evidence doesn't support it.
And finally, Glenn, let's finish off with this. Why do we know about these instances where U.S. attorneys or prosecutors aren't willing to accede to Trump's demands and just, prosecute these people who are, again, the targets of Trump's ire? Isn't this the kind of thing where someone like Elizabeth Yusi, if she says no to her superior when they asked her to sign her name on the line to bring forward this indictment against Letitia James, isn't this something that's supposed to be internal? I'm just curious why we know this. I would presume that Trump, in his effort not to have his own DOJ help the defense build their case up against him, would prefer that these things remain private. And so why are we privy to this stuff that's happening, behind closed doors at the DOJ or at these U.S. attorneys' offices?
Yeah, there are a couple of layers to the answer to that question. So first of all, we know it because, as the reporting shows, there are multiple sources in the Norfolk U.S. Attorney's Office who were willing to go on the record, whether anonymously or not, that Elizabeth Yusi has shared with members of her office. Brian, as I would share with members of my office, the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, as we were puzzling through or perhaps even struggling with charging decisions to make sure we got it right, I might bounce it off any number of prosecutors who are more experienced than me, who have handled similar cases or matters. And, sometimes the press is successful at, digging that stuff out and getting people to go on the record, again, whether a named source or an anonymous source. So that is how the reporting has, brought this to the public's attention. But here's the other thing. The other layer to that answer is Donald Trump might very well not want the sort of disgrace that goes along with yet another decision by experienced career prosecutors that, no, Mr. President, we're not going to go after your avowed enemies just because you say we should. We actually need evidence supporting an indictment and a prosecution. However, that information would have to be disclosed if the rule of law and the Constitution is followed, would have to be disclosed to Letitia James' defense attorney in the event she's indicted, because it's what is considered Brady evidence. The constitutional due process rights that we all enjoy, the Supreme Court has interpreted those to include, if the prosecutors have evidence that could exonerate or be helpful to the defendant in presenting a defense at trial or on a motion to dismiss, the prosecutors must. They are required by the Constitution to turn it over to the defense team. So one way or another, this information would have come out, but it looks like it's come out earlier than, the law would have required it to be disclosed to Tish James' defense attorneys.
Right. If they were even going to abide by that rule and disclose it anyway. And
there is that. You're right.
I don't think that we could. I think that if we're putting our buck on whether or not Trump is going to follow the law, it's not a great bet to be able to do so. With that said, this is obviously a fast-moving story right now. So for those who are watching, if you'd like to follow along and if you'd like to support our work and support independent media more broadly, the best way to do that is to subscribe to our channels. Completely free, but again, a great way to support what we do. I'll put the links to both of our channels right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.